Well, welcome to the Real Life, Real People podcast. Today, yes, we have a legend in the public speaking arena. He lives in Canada. He's got his own very, very small YouTube channel called Master Talk, which has just got a couple of thousand people who follow it. He's a legend. He's a top bloke. Please make welcome today, Mr. Brenden. How are you, buddy?
Very good, Robert. How about yourself, man?
Mate, I'm really good. I'm really good. Thank you for taking the time all the way from Canada to talk to us down here in Australia today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It's great to be on.
Mate, so Canada, you've seemed to have really hit the nose there when it comes to what you're doing. Did you have you always lived in Canada? Were you born and raised over there?
You got it. Born. Actually, I haven't left my house since I was born.
Oh
So,
no.
I've never moved out. Never. I've traveled a lot though,
Yeah.
but I always have a special place in Montreal. All my family's here. All my relationships are here. So it didn't make sense for me to move, and I've always been happy here.
Mate, if you got a place you love, why would you want to move? I mean, to be, you know. So big family, small family?
Big family. My
Yeah.
mom had 8 other siblings. My dad had 7. Probably, I actually lost count. I'm sure. I'm not even sure if those numbers are right. But there's a lot of cousins out there. Let's just say we don't spend a lot of money on hotels. I think that's one way of putting it.
Oh dear. And Sri Lankan families love to get together and love to cook and love to enjoy each other's company. Same over in Montreal.
You got it. Maybe not this year, but definitely in the past. We'd always go to Toronto to go see visit our cousins, which isn't too far. It's like a 4 or 5 hour drive for those who aren't familiar with Canada. So there's always a lot of time for quality time for sure.
Mate, one question I do ask all of my guests is, what was school like for you? And an honest question, were you a good student?
It really depended, Rob. I got lucky a lot as a kid. A lot of people in this situation, they say, "Oh, I used to get bullied a lot as a
Yeah.
kid. I had a lot of anxiety growing up."
Mm,
I never had any of those issues, to be honest. And the
yeah.
reason was because Canadians are just so bloody nice. What
Yeah.
can you do? There's just, whether you're a kid, everyone's great. The one big challenge I did have, though, was I grew up in a French education system
Yeah.
because in Montreal, you need to know the language, and I didn't. So that because of that, I struggled a lot because I was giving presentations in a language I didn't know. I was talking to people in a language I couldn't speak. So that's something that was definitely challenging as well. But in terms of being a good student, bad student, I would say up until elementary school, which is
Yeah.
normal, I guess, for
Yeah.
12-year-olds, I wasn't very good at school. But then over time, when I saw the benefits of studying, I became as we call a nerd with the academia. So I did really well for myself later on.
Mate, it's only a nerd if you're studying strange stuff that no one else knows anything about. And so they call you a nerd just to get a mate of mine, his son was called a nerd at school. He's now one of the top professors in one of the biggest universities in Sydney. They told him had learning difficulties the whole lot. He's now travelled to Egypt, led digs, and he was a nerd. So I reckon, and I've seen him, he doesn't do too bad with the ladies. So I don't think being a nerd is that bad.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, couldn't agree. Yeah. So you left school, did you go straight to uni? Did you work? What did you do?
Exactly. So I went to university after and I studied in business school.
Yeah.
And that's how I found my love for public speaking, all that stuff happened. And that's why I happen to know a lot of people who live in Australia because I used to do a lot of competitions internationally.
Yeah.
So students from UNSW, from the University of Melbourne,
Yep.
they would fly out to Montreal every year. So lots of great folks, lots of great times.
So you were sort of forced into public speaking being at uni?
You could say something like that. So I used to do these things, Robert, in business school called case competitions.
Yep.
Think of it like professional sports, but for nerds.
Yep.
So other guys my age were playing cricket or footy or rugby. I wasn't really into that stuff, but
Yep.
I presented competitively.
Yes.
So to get into some of the best corporations on the planet, companies like McKinsey or Bain or IBM, if you want to work as a consultant there, a lot of people do these competitions. And
Yeah.
that's how I learned how to speak.
Wow. And so what was it like the first time you got up and you had no training, you'd never done it before, you just got up there and started talking in a language you probably didn't understand? What was it
Yeah,
like?
I got lucky towards the end though, because I switched to English school when I went to uni. But you're right, that was definitely the case for the first couple of years. But yeah, I remember I was 19 or so. I was 2 months into
Yeah.
university.
Yeah.
I had an oversized suit and a tie, let's just say, that didn't stop at my belt.
Yes.
And I remember this vividly, like it was yesterday. It was my second case competition. I walk in, and the lady in the back goes, before we have this team present, let's give the judges an opportunity to introduce themselves. And then one of them stands up and goes, "Hi everyone, my name's Bill, and I'm the managing partner for this company." And you're just sitting there as a 19-year-old, like, okay. And I
Yeah.
have this oversized suit on, a tie that just didn't end at the belt.
Yeah.
So let's just say I wasn't very good when I started.
Oh man, it brings back some memories. I've actually watched the same when the CEOs got up and they can't speak. They are absolutely terrible. I counted one lady; she had 32 ums in under a minute.
Oh my God.
And at that time, wasn't doing public speaking. I was doing, I was just doing sales, and you sort of still put my toe in the water, and I had no idea why at the time she was like that. And then later, of course, as you and I know, you get to find out the reason why they're like that, and it's just simple nerves. And but one on one, awesome. In front of a customer, awesome. Put her on a stage, not a hope in hell. So, who taught you, or who were your inspirations when you were learning about public speaking?
Yeah, I definitely had a lot of heroes growing up in the speaking space,
Hmm.
and I'm happy to name a couple. One in
Exactly.
particular was Scott Harrison,
Yeah.
who is the CEO of Charity Water. I think the guy is a savant in storytelling and marketing. The
Hmm.
way he thinks about his nonprofit, and he speaks probably 200 times a year. It's pretty crazy.
Awesome.
So yeah, so he's a big inspiration. But I would say the main way I learned communication was through this competition program. So how it worked was, for every competition, we'd probably present 10 or 15 times just to practice.
Hmm.
And I was kind of like the craziest student, one of them, who had went through the program. So I personally did 50 of these competitions myself.
Yeah.
So I'd probably presented 400 or 500 times at least in 3 years.
Yeah.
But as I was gaining more experience in communication, a lot of my coaches were senior level executives at companies who used to be a part of the program 10
Yeah.
years ago. Well, what happened was a lot of these new students would start to enter the program, and there wouldn't be a speech coach, because speech coaches are really expensive, as you probably know, since you
Yeah.
do trainings on the subject yourself in your country. So I just said, why don't I teach them?
Yeah.
And I wasn't really good at it. I'd go up to people and just go, yeah, you gotta do less filler words. I was terrible, but I did it every day for 3 years. And now I coach, CEOs of companies, which is kind of an odd transition, but yeah, that's what happened.
Mate, that's great. So, what do you think when you look at it now and you look at executives who think they can speak, or the ones that can speak? What do you think is the biggest difference between those guys?
That's a great question. I would say the biggest issue I have with execs in general when I'm coaching them, I don't take on those clients anymore, the ones that are kind of hard-headed, but I'd say most of the executives, they suffer from the fear of success, or because they're so successful in what they do, they think that everything that led up to that is all right. So
Hmm.
for example, the common complaint I get from a 45-year-old executive who's probably vice president at like an IBM or a McKinsey goes, "Well, Brenden, I mean, why would I listen to you? I mean, you're a kid, first of all. And second, I've had a 20-year sprint in my career and I've done really well for myself." So when you're in that type of position, you know this very well yourself since you're a
Hmm.
trainer as well, is because you're so high up in the hierarchy now, no one's going to tell you that you're a bad communicator,
True. True.
right? No one's going to say anything. So you need to be really open-minded as an individual to say, am I actually communicating in the way that I am? And that's why you see a lot of CEOs, mostly outside of the Fortune 500, I would say like medium, small businesses, that are really bad communicators, because mostly nobody tells them that they're bad.
What do you think the biggest mistake they make around communication?
Right. I would say the biggest mistake, and this is true with everybody, is that they practice multiple presentations. So what the best communicators on the planet do is that they focus in on one speech and they present it hundreds of times until it's perfect. So a good example I can give is Tony Robbins,
Hmm.
who's literally been doing the same seminar since he was 20. So he's been doing it for maybe 40 years now, UPW. So Unleash the Power Within, he just does it over
Yes.
and over and over and over again. And that's what makes him incredible as a speaker. So if you're someone who's listening right now, as the CEO of an executive, you're probably thinking, well, Brenden, my projects are going to change. My deal flow is going to change. How am I supposed to present the same thing over and over again? But my retort to that is always, there's always a presentation in everything that you do that's repeatable. So an example is, if you're a CEO of an organization, you're always going to talk about your business, what you do, who you serve at some point.
Yes.
So you need to start thinking about how to make that single presentation world class, so that the learnings that you get from that presentation trickles into everything else you do.
So when you look back now, when you first started and now, what was the biggest mistake you made when you first started that
I
you
would say
didn't know at the time?
oh yeah, absolutely. I made a lot of them, and I still make a lot of them today.
Yes, yes.
But but I would say the biggest one is I picked the wrong target audience when I started. So I had this brilliant idea, quote unquote. So I'm obviously being sarcastic for people who aren't seeing the quotations, saying, well, if every university professor knew I existed, they would share my videos with their students in perpetuity,
Yeah,
because the students would always change.
true.
50,000 cold emails and 6 months of work later, I got nothing. And the reason I got nothing was because they didn't take me seriously. They said,
Mm,
who's this guy? I don't know him. I don't have a relationship with him.
mm,
So what I realized is the academic community is very close-minded. Hence why no one has really innovated in the communication space for a very long time, I
mm.
found.
True.
So I failed miserably, just lots of emails. So the learning there for me was, what community is going to look at me and say, I'm really open to this idea? And the answer was bottom up instead of top to bottom. So instead of going to the professors and having them share it with the students, go straight to the students and have the students share it with the professors. So that has got me a lot better results. Going to student associations, giving them free workshops around the world pretty much now, since I'm alone in my basement now. I can do everything online, and they share the videos bottom up. So
Yes,
that's what's been really successful for me. And the other side is, of course, podcast hosts,
yes.
because they understand the value of communication because they're a host. So that's another target.
So when you look back now, what was a moment, and we've all had it on stage, where you've absolutely fluffed it? You're laughing inside at yourself, but you've got to save it. Two questions. What was the moment? And for someone listening, when they've either frozen or something's gone wrong on stage, how do you save it?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely happens a lot. I would say one in particular I can tell you about before COVID hit. So I
Yeah.
was giving a keynote to 300 or so kids, and I found out 15 minutes before the keynote that I had to present half of it in French. And I just went, and I practiced like 3 months for that keynote. It's like one of my biggest
Yeah.
deals this year. So I just looked at her and I just went, what? I have to get half of it in French. So yeah, it was hard to hold in. Kind of, it was more
Yeah.
nerves than, I guess, laughter. But I was like, how am I supposed to survive this one?
Yeah.
But I think the lesson I could share with people is what the best speakers on the planet do, and I'm not saying I'm in that category, but how they think is this idea of, who are we trying to serve and what result are we trying to achieve? So most of us, when we're scared of a presentation, we're frozen, we're nervous, we're always tending to think about ourselves.
Hmm.
We're saying, oh, I hope I don't mess this up. I don't really want to look bad
Yeah. Living
in
in
front of
bleed.
all these. Exactly.
Hmm.
Whereas what the world-class speaker does is says, I'm stealing hundreds of these people's time. Like if you do the total, let's say I take a 30-minute hour, I do a keynote, and there's 300 people.
Yeah.
I'm taking 300 hours, the most precious time they don't get back. So I better not screw this up.
Yeah.
I better give a damn good show. So at the end of that hour, they go, wow, that was such a great use of my time. I'm so glad I was here for this.
That, mate, you're so true. I think we've all been on stage and done it, and you've sat there and you can froze. I actually said to one guy who was, talking about that in the class, I said, who else knows you've mucked it up apart from you? Or you've forgotten to say something? He went, no one. I said, so what's the problem? And he went, yeah. Another big one that a lot of people say, and I think it's a fallacy, that doing public speaking is one of the scariest things you can do. I'm like you, it's oxygen for me. I love it. I get out on stage. How do you do when someone comes to you and says they lack that confidence, they want to speak? How do you get them over that yourself and to coach them to be able to walk out on stage and just go for it?
Absolutely. First part to that, I love the analogy you gave. A similar one I've heard that I think will help a lot of people is dance recitals or performances. The dance teacher always says, if you mess up, Just get back up and keep going. Nobody else knows the routine except for you.
True.
Right? So they'll just go, oh, well, he was supposed to fall.
Yeah.
But if you make it show and you go, oh, no, I wasn't supposed to fall, then your audience will know. So confidence.
And
How do you met? Yeah, go ahead.
What's the biggest audience you've spoken to?
I would probably say 400, since I'm pretty early in my speaking career. So probably I would say a couple of hundred, but hopefully one day, I guess YouTube, I speak to a bit more than 400 people every week, but
I mean,
yeah, we'll see.
It's different, you know. I mean, when we talk, you and I talk about stage, people think a physical stage. These days, a stage isn't necessarily that. It's YouTube, it's podcasts, it's webcams, it's hopefully soon back on stage and all that. So, you know, that's going to be true. Another thing for a lot of people who are beginners, if someone came up to you and said, look, I've got this great idea, I want to learn how to speak, what do you do with them? What do you tell them to get started?
Of course. So for me, I always like to share my easiest technique. And if anyone applies this, you could forget the rest of the conversation or any of the rest of my tips. This tip alone will 10x your skills.
Yep.
And the method is called the puzzle method.
Yep.
Public speaking in many ways is like a jigsaw puzzle. You know those puzzle pieces you kind of put together as a kid?
Yeah.
So if I asked you, Robert, let's say you're working on this puzzle yourself, which pieces would you start with first and why?
Awesome, mate. That's a great analogy.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the answer people give to that usually is the edges. They go, hey, if I'm making a puzzle, I start with the edge pieces first, right? It's much easier. And then you work your way into the middle. But here's the punchline. We don't do that in public speaking. We do the opposite. So we have a presentation in a boardroom generally. We shove a bunch of content in it. Yes. We go to the presentation. We ramble through the entire thing. We get to the last slide, and it sounds something like this. Yeah, so thanks. That's probably 95% of the presentations I hear. But if we start to compare public speaking to a jigsaw puzzle, we'll know to start with the edges first. Practice your introduction 50 times, not 3 times, not 5 times. Do it 50 times. It'll only take you an hour. It's actually not that long.
No.
Same thing with the conclusion. What's a great movie with a terrible ending? Last time I checked, terrible movie. 50 times the conclusion. That tip alone will make your presentations 10 times better. Because you'll look at your intro, your conclusion, go, wow, I've never done this 50 times before. It's actually pretty easy. And then you have that confidence you need to tackle the middle. But much like a jigsaw puzzle, who does puzzles on their own? Nobody I know. So work with the team and get it done.
So how do you deal with somebody who is just starting out? And like you started to coach people and the big CEO said, why would I go to you? You're only a kid. You don't know anything, you know, which it doesn't cut it. You can learn off anybody. The age doesn't come into it. And they say, look, I know all about fishing. I want to go and speak to fishing clubs about, you know, how we catch barramundi in Australia or we catch salmon off Alaska. What do you say to them but they don't know who I am? They won't book me. You look
Absolutely.
at me, what do you do?
And I'm sure you give the same advice, which is there's a very big difference between a keynote that pays and a keynote that doesn't. Right? At the end of the day, if you want to get paid for a keynote that you deliver, you need to solve a specific problem for that audience.
True.
Or else the organizer isn't going to give you money. The only exception to that rule is if you have a big social media following. But even in that instance, you're still solving a problem for the event planner, even if you're saying gibberish, which is selling tickets to the event. If somebody famous goes to your event, even if they say nothing, even if they just sit there and say absolutely nothing, event planners will pay you your retainer because you're selling a bunch of tickets for them, so they don't care. But besides that, if you think about the fishing analogy you gave as an example there, I don't see many organizations in the world except a very specialized fishing association that you probably should have a relationship with that would pay you even a couple of bucks to give that type of keynote. So that's one way. And the other part to your question, why should people take me seriously? And I think this is great advice for people in general. My philosophy has always been show, don't tell. You know, don't tell people that you're a speech coach. Don't tell people you're a great speaker. Show them. So when I used to pitch these, I don't do this anymore because I have enough clients to kind of go through the business now. But when I would pitch a CEO, I wouldn't say, hey, you know, I'm a speech coach. I do this. Here's my YouTube video. No. I would say, I watched your keynote on YouTube and it sucked. Here's the 58 mistakes that you made that every other professional speech coach in your life didn't catch.
Yeah.
They always respond with, how much do you charge? So that's a good way of thinking about it.
You wouldn't get a date using that philosophy, would you?
Yeah, no, that's a different, that's a different, probably different expert to come on the show and give a different angle to that one.
Oh, mate, that's very, very good. Quick one that I hate, but I'm going to ask you. Notes, cue cards, or nothing?
I mean, we probably both have the same perspective on this. I hate cue cards. I think they act as a barrier between yourself and the audience. It's in the same way. Let's say we're having this conversation and you would ask me a question. I'd say, hey, wait a second, Robert. Let me just go pull up my cue cards.
I've seen that.
And
I've seen that.
oh, really? It's so weird. It ruins the it factor, that relationship between yourself and the host, and that's what adds value to the people who are listening. And I would argue the same thing is true in presentations. If you say point number 1 and point number 2, and give me a second here, and you're looking at your cue cards for point number 3, you lose that relationship with your audience. So I only recommend cue cards in one instance, and that one instance, and it's really for 1% of people out there, if you literally vomit on stage. If you are literally vomiting as you're presenting, then use cue cards. But for most people out there that can get through a presentation without puking, you can absolutely do it without cue cards.
Yeah, when I was doing a 4-week nightly course with some guys, and I said, right, do the old 30-second get up and tell everyone who you are, which terrified most of them. And as you know, by the end of it, they can't shut them up. And then I said, okay, you're going to do a speech next week and you can use notes, cue cards and all that. And they all brought up, they turned up. First one got up stage. I said, excuse me for a second. I walked over, grabbed them and threw them on the ground. I said, now speak.
I love that.
And they just went, ah. And I looked at them and said, look, if you know your subject and you're passionate about what you're talking about, you don't need cards. So the structure and all that we can teach. And it absolutely scared the hell out of everyone else sitting in the audience. But did they? It was like someone hit them with a jolt, bang. Exactly what you said, no cue cards, no nothing. It's the only way to go. One of the ones I've noticed that is very, very popular now, and one of the top speaking trainers in Australia, Sam Cawthorn, teaches this very, very well. Storytelling is the only way to justify your point when you're talking.
Right. So my perspective on storytelling is actually very different than the industry's. So I'll probably disagree a lot with Sam on this. Is this idea that storytelling is important, right? We all know it. We're storytelling machines. It helps us engage and retain information. But here's the part most experts don't talk about. They don't tell you how hard it is to actually learn. They go, oh yeah, you should tell stories. And you're like, how do I do it? And they run off and they're like, where are you going? Right. So my perspective on this is you want to start with foundational elements of public speaking. Because if you don't know the basics, when you tell the story, especially in the context of public speaking and presentations, that story is going to fall flat. Like so, once upon a time, there was a goat. And see, it just doesn't land.
No.
Even if the story is good, it's just not going to work.
True.
So that'll be the first part. Focus on foundational skills, easy wins, eye contact, filler words, talking to your audience, just having conversations, dinners with them. Most speakers don't even do that. I would start the conversation there. And then as you get more confident, you start to juggle more balls, then go into storytelling. But I'm happy to give you a teaser. So for me, storytelling means the following: that you understand your audience more than they understand themselves. The reason we're fascinated by stories, whether it's Disney movies, whether it's dinner conversations, whether it's personal horrifying tragedies, is not because of the cartoon characters in the Disney movies, but because we relate to their personal stories and the events that take place in our own lives. But the issue is 99% of speakers can't make that emotional connection work until they get the rest of it done. So I recommend start with the basics and then move your way into storytelling later.
So we've all around the world experienced this COVID-19. It's sort of changed everything we all do. A lot of us where we used to be on stage and do face to face, and now, like you, we're doing it over a microphone and a camera, as I am at the moment, 5 a.m. in Australia.
Wow.
So, but
Could have picked a different time.
Same. It days back the other way. Public speaking, 2021 and beyond. What are your thoughts on where it's going to go and how it will look?
Yeah, you probably have a similar approach to mine, but I think we're going to see a hybrid approach. I don't think the online world is going to die by any means, in the sense that more people are getting used to the medium now, or forced into the medium. And I think we're going to see a lot more speakers start to utilize social media in the future. Whether it's on YouTube, whether it's on a podcast, they're going to start to really leverage this to build better relationships with planners. But the other side of the equation is, I definitely think in person is coming back. I mean, I miss it, you miss it, we all do. It's that emotional connection, not just with you on a stage or us on a stage,
Yeah.
but that emotional connection that we have when we talk to the person in real life. It's a magic that's very difficult to recreate online. It's a very different feeling if I was in your house right now and we were doing this
Yeah.
podcast and we'd go for breakfast after. It's
Yeah.
a very different thing.
Yeah.
So I definitely think it's going to be back, but I see kind of like a hybrid model. And I also think for those who are interested in speaking, because it seems like a lot of executives are listening to this, this is the best time to get into the industry, because a lot of speakers are running for their lives now. You know, all of their revenues kind of, they didn't diversify enough. They don't think it's possible. So the supply demand ratio is starting to change a lot now.
Right. And another thing, with the advent of Zoom and Skype and everything now, much more than what we ever did, I see a lot of companies never invested in public speaking training, and businesses. It doesn't matter if it's a guy down the front delivering, all the way through to the people on the phone, to the sales reps, the accountants. Do you see them actually waking up and going, wow, we need to teach our people how to speak to our customers? Or do you see them wanting to go back to how it was, even though we will never go back to how it was?
Yeah, I would say my general industry perspective, I'd love your impressions as well, is I would say that the companies that are winning right now in COVID, that are actually thriving off COVID, have a lot more budget. So those companies tend to invest more in those types of trainings, especially public speaking now. So a company I can give you as an example, probably Zoom. I'm sure Zoom has probably 10x their training budgets because their revenue just 100x.
Yes,
But I don't think that's necessarily the case for the opposite. So industries that are hurting right now, the hospitality business,
very much.
the restoration business, even if communication is important, it's just not in their priority list versus just living another day. So I definitely think you're seeing big variations across each of these sectors depending on how they're performing in the COVID world. But definitely there's an increased importance. I mean, I've seen a spike in my YouTube videos as well. So I definitely think there's a trend going in that direction.
So you like just tell our listeners a little bit about your little YouTube channel, what you do with it, why you do it, and how did you get so many listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's a very small channel, as you alluded to. But I think the goal with Master Talk, and what I saw in the industry, especially being a fresh one in the sector, is I felt that too many speech coaches weren't generous enough with the free content that they were sharing. And the reason is because speech coaching is very profitable as a business. If you have 10 executive clients or 15 workshops, or you're like a Sam, or you're a big speech trainer in Australia, you don't really need to share free content, especially if you're good. Like
Yes.
people like yourself or Sam, people are really strong at what they do. They don't need to share free content. And I felt that was such a shame, because the most important skill to learn in our lives, I fundamentally believe, is communication. Yet nobody's democratizing the information for free. And at the time when I started Master Talk, I never really had an intention of building a business out of it, because I was very successful at IBM, and I still work there. I'm a technology consultant there, and it's a very good job and very good pay. So for me, it was just, oh, let me just make these videos for people. And, you know, Mastertalk kind of went kind of crazy over the last couple of months. So I said, why don't I just build a business out of this? And that's what led to it. But the overarching goal of my life is to be the next Dale Carnegie, Robert, in the
Yes.
sense that I think Dale did a great job sharing a lot of insights, but he didn't have the right mediums of technology to conserve that information, like podcasting on a show, or having a YouTube channel. It's the best way to teach public speaking at scale, but he didn't have access to that tech, and I have a head start, so I might as well do it myself.
So before we get into our wind-up questions, how do people get in touch with you if they're listening and they're watching going, Shivers, I want to talk more to this dude, or I want to learn more from him?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the best way is definitely Master Talk, the YouTube channel. So all you have to do is go on YouTube and type Master Talk in one word, and all my contact information, all my Instagram handles are all there. So feel free to connect with me over there.
Okay, so, you're back now in your hometown. COVID's gone. The restaurants are open. I've booked your table for 3 or 4 people. Seats are empty. Just you. Who do you invite?
You, of course. I gotta. I mean, geez, I've been waiting so long for the restaurants. So if you're the one who's opening the restaurants for the world, I'll definitely invite you to thank you. But besides you, I would say the 3 biggest people that come to mind is definitely Scott Harrison.
Hmm.
He's a big inspiration for my life. I've loved his book. I've loved his work, and I have a lot of questions for him. So he'd probably be one. Second one would be Gary Vaynerchuk. I think
Oh,
Gary V's
yes,
done a
yes, very
great
much.
job.
Yes.
And I'm pretty sure I'll get dinner with most of these people. They're actually not that hard to access if you have the right bank account. But and then the third thing, the third person, it would either be between Seth Godin and Peter Thiel. I think they're both very fascinating individuals. For Peter, he's the founder of PayPal, and he started a company called Palantir later on. He just asks a lot of fascinating questions, like what is the truth that you believe in that most people disagree with you on. So I would just get dinner with him to figure out what other questions he's got in his booklet there that I can take and learn.
Yeah, well, as they say, they gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and that's exactly how much we should talk. The rest of us should be listening. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you this morning. You are a legend, and anyone who wants to have a look at someone who is supposed to be, everyone says you've got to be in the industry for years, you've got to be old, grey, wear a blue suit to achieve anything. You're wrong. I mean, anyone can have a go. And
except for the blue suit. I have the blue suit.
Oh, you have the blue suit. Mate, the proof is in the pudding. Anyone who goes and watches your YouTube video, you see you are who you are. You walk the talk. Congratulations. And we hope to talk again soon. You stay safe over in Canada.
You too. Thanks for the time.